Welcome back. You're live with us tonight on In Focus. Thanks for staying on. Civil society organizations believe it's necessary to have an electoral system that ensures political accountability. They also agree that South Africans are currently facing an escalated political, economic and social crisis. Here to help revisit the electoral amendment bill that's before Parliament, we are joined by Lawson, Naidoo, Executive Secretary at the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. Lawson, good evening and thank you very much for your time. You, of course, believe that the current bill that is sitting before Parliament doesn't lend itself to a free and fair election come 2024. It doesn't start now, though. I mean, it started way back in '94 when we came into this particular dispensation. The current electoral system of PR, that is a proportional representation system, was supposed to have lasted for just 2 elections. It has lasted this long because of various issues that parliamentarians have ignored, including now even the courts saying do something about this. It looks like we are still going to be delayed and might not even be there in 2024. In your view, what is at fault about the current electoral system?
Good evening and thank you very much. You rightly point out that this is an issue that it doesn't just emanate from the judgment of the Constitutional Court in the New Nation Movement case 2 years ago, but really goes back to 20 years ago when we had the Van Zyl-Slabbert report. And the reason that we had that report was that the system that you've described, the closed party list system with proportional representation, was put in place for the first 2 elections in 1994 and then again in 1999. But the final constitution required that there should be a review of that electoral system after those 2 elections. And as we well know, the majority recommendation of the Van Zyl-Slabbert task team in 2003 was ignored, and the cabinet agreed at the time simply to continue with the closed party list system, and that has now been entrenched in law until the Constitutional Court judgment in 2020, which ruled that the current system is unconstitutional to the extent that it does not accommodate independent candidates at a national and provincial level. What is really, I think, critical in this whole debate is not what is best for political parties or indeed what is best for independent candidates, but an electoral system should be fit for purpose and should really serve the interests of our democracy and be designed in the best interests of the voters, ultimately as the primary stakeholders in this process. And the bill before Parliament does not put the interests of the voters first. It puts the interests of political parties first and seeks to do as little as possible to change the current system to accommodate independent candidates and therefore satisfying, or as some have said, malicious compliance with the judgment of the Constitutional Court.
So you're saying at this stage you're not necessarily calling for the direct election of the president. Let's start there. Why? And then we'll get into what exactly are you calling for. Why do you believe that we are not yet at the point where we could call for a direct election of the president?
Well, the issue of the direct election of the president has never really been on the agenda. It's gained a certain amount of a focus and attention recently because of the recommendation in the State Capture Commission report, which postulates the idea that perhaps some consideration should be given to the direct election of the president. That would require, a wholesale restructuring of our constitution, which is essentially based on a Westminster style of parliamentary democracy, where Parliament, which includes the elected representatives of the people, elect the president from amongst themselves, amongst the members of Parliament. So I don't think the issue of the direct election of the president is something that we should be considering at this point in time. I think we have a much more fundamental task on our hands, is to fix the primary electoral model to ensure that there's a greater nexus or link between voters and their elected representatives. As we all know, when we go to the polling stations now for national and provincial elections, we put our crosses against the names or emblems of political parties, not against individual candidates from those parties. And what is being called for by civil society organizations is a hybrid or mixed constituency and PR list system, where you would have a number of MPs, for example, 200 members of the National Assembly elected from single-member constituencies, so that the electorate in that area know exactly who their representative is. They would have put her or him into that position, and that person would be accountable to that segment of voters in a particular geographical area. There would then be a PR list top-up to ensure that there is proportionality in the outcome of the election, so that political parties who may not have secured seats through the constituency system will be allocated seats as a result of the PR list vote. That's a system we think that blends the best of both worlds, ensures greater connection between the electorate and the voters, and addresses one of the fundamental findings of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, which is that there is a significant accountability deficit in South Africa, and that members of parliament were able to turn a blind eye to allegations of state capture and corruption, and yet faced no consequences for that. And that's one of the reasons why the Chief Justice has suggested that Parliament should seriously consider a hybrid model. And that's not the first time this proposal has been made. It was made, as I said, by the Finsale Slabbert Task Team. It was then in 2009 made by the Independent Panel Assessment of Parliament.
Yeah.
Again in 2017 by former President Kgalema Motlante's high-level panel on Parliament, as well as by government's own advisory task team last year, which was led by Vali Musa, that advised the Minister of Home Affairs, Aaron Motsoaledi, to implement a system that I've just described with 200 single-member constituencies and a PR list top-up.
As we sit right now, we are, as I said, not sure when this will be in place. It does look like we might not even make the 2024 deadline, because according to the presentations that were made by the IEC at your last week meeting, is that it will take about 18 months, which they themselves feel that we might not be at these particular upcoming national government elections. What is your frustration, particularly about how parliamentarians have been handling this?
Well, the primary frustration is that Parliament was given 2 years by the Constitutional Court to amend the Electoral Act. That 2 years expired in June of this year, and it was only in January this year that the Minister of Home Affairs, Aaron Motsoaledi, tabled a draft bill before the National Assembly. So 18 months had passed before the executive did anything about this Constitutional Court judgment. And we're now facing a critical deadline because, as you've said, the IEC say that they require approximately 18 months to make the necessary preparations before an election can be held. Now, I'm sure that there's some room for maneuver within that 18 months, and they could be able to do that more speedily. What will certainly not be able to be implemented by 2024 is the kind of hybrid model that I've just described with constituencies as well as PR list, because constituencies would have to be demarcated, and that's the process that necessarily takes time. And even where the Parliament passes the legislation by the new deadline that the court has set of the 10th of December is at some risk at the moment, because insufficient progress has been made in the National Assembly. Even if the bill gets passed by the National Assembly, it still has to be referred to the National Council of Provinces for them to process that bill. So the timelines are extremely tight. But what we do know for certain, because the Constitutional Court has stressed this point, is that the next election cannot be run on the existing system, because the court has already declared that to be unconstitutional.
Yeah. Beyond just being able to have independent candidates in there, create a tighter, closer link between the electorate and representatives, you're saying this, of course, could turn around the tide of the social and maybe even broadly the economic crisis. Now, speaking of an economy, talk to me in practical terms. Now, we are seeing a contraction of 0.7% 8% in the GDP. We are seeing dismal numbers in construction, in manufacturing, and so on and so forth. What would the electorate be able to do if we had this kind of constituency system when they see these kinds of things happening, and maybe even failure to implement plans that are supposed to give us the high sustainable growth that will create jobs?
Well, I think one of the significant benefits of a reformed electoral system that creates a closer link with the voters is that it would really focus the minds of our members of parliament to act in the interests of their constituencies and of the nation at large. At the moment, that because there's no accountability, parliamentarians can do as they please with no consequences. They're not accountable except to their party leaders, and parties are reluctant to lose that grip on their members. And as we've seen over many years of our democracy, that the interest of the voters, of the electorate, the poor and the marginalized, is not a priority as it should be within our constitutional dispensation. So this is certainly a weakness in the architecture of our constitution, that the electoral system does not suit the needs of our democracy in terms of dealing, as you point out, with issues of economic growth, one could easily say of social disparities, and other inequities within our society. So it would really focus the minds and make sure that MPs focus on the job at hand, knowing that the electorate that put them there has certain priorities in terms of economic growth, in terms of peace and security, making sure that we are safe, making sure that we have access to adequate social services, be it education or health. And I think that would certainly have a significant impact on the quality of our democracy, the quality of our elected representatives, and very importantly, turn around this trend of a reluctance by the electorate to participate in formal electoral elections. We've seen dwindling turnouts at successive elections over the last 10 years or so. And it's a very worrying trend, because more and more people are questioning whether there's any point in voting. And that's largely because the system does not work. The people don't feel invested in it. They don't feel that their representatives are acting in their interest. So people question why they should vote. And that's something we really need to tackle.
Lawson, Naidoo, appreciate your time as always. Thanks so much for coming on. He is, of course, the Executive Secretary of KSEC.